the topic today, because Tawheed, when the word Tawheed is mentioned, the word Wahhabi also comes up as well, or the school of Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab, and there's a lot of misunderstanding about what does it mean, or what does it refer to, and who they are as well. We thought we'd just shed some light on that from a traditionally Sunni perspective. So, in terms of the reasons for this discussion, there are a number of different reasons. Number one, we have to be critical of ourselves. Muslims are in the spotlight on a regular basis, and when you dig deeper into some things which Muslims do, which unfortunately result in violence, what you will find often is that the topic of Tawheed comes up. There's always different reasons and factors why people engage in what they do, unfortunately, but Tawheed is one aspect, and instead of just not discussing it, it's best if we do discuss it ourselves as opposed to leaving it to other people to discuss. The other reason is there's been a promotion of Salafi Wahhabi scholarship and intolerant non-mainstream views. So those, as I've mentioned before, have been propagated now for, at least in this time I can think of, 20 more years, in the UK probably longer than that, and now in mainstream media as well. When you talk about Tawheed, often what you find is the views of this particular school being promoted, and often sometimes when the responses do come, they're not very accurate or strong or detailed. And that's not always been the case, but anecdotally I'm just talking about what I've seen, and there's a slide on that coming up as well. And another reason is there's been numerous queries about Salafism, Wahhabism, and its scholars. What is a Salafi? What is a Wahhabi? We can't go into exhaustive depth, but we can cover the main points, inshallah, today. And then the other point is Daesh and other extremist groups are faithful followers of the teachings of Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab and the scholars of Najd. This is a controversial point, and I think the Salafi scholars who follow Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab will deny this very, very strongly. So it's a point which has been raised by some scholars, and I saw this a few years back. A scholar I follow, who has visited the UK actually, he put up on his Facebook that Daesh/ISIS and Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab are pretty much the same thing, which is a very controversial statement to make. And obviously people do respond to that, and there's a debate which is ongoing, but inshallah I leave it to you to make up your mind by the end how much similarity there is between the two. Okay. Now that last point is quite controversial, and has been stated by a number of different scholars now. Sheikh Adil Kalbani is one. He was an imam in the Masjid al-Haram in Mecca for some time, and he's no longer the imam there, but he not too long ago, a few years back, said the following: we follow, meaning in Saudi Arabia, the religious establishment, follow the same thought as Daesh, but apply it in a refined way. Okay, so it's kind of the same principles, but lightened and watered down somewhat. That's what he's saying, refined way. That's what he means by refined way. They, meaning Daesh, draw their ideas from what is written in our own books, from our own principles. We do not criticize the thought on which Daesh is based. And this is these comments are part of a longer interview that he gave on a TV channel, and which has been translated in full as well. And it's a very good discussion on his part. So he's stating it himself, and he is a very important figure. He's not just anybody who's saying this. This is someone who was the ex-imam of the Masjid al-Haram saying this. Okay? Obviously, it's a very controversial point, because there's some people locally and the United Kingdom and in the Muslim world who regard Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab as a mujaddid. So it's a big problem. You're condemning a group now, but then at the same time you're saying the person that they look to as well and the person you look up to is the exact same person. It's a controversial point, but that is a discussion which needs to be had, and it's being had at the moment as well. Right, and then mainstream Sunni scholarship on Wahhabism. So the point is that when Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab emerged in the Arabian Peninsula, unanimously, mainstream Sunni scholars, and when we say mainstream Sunni scholars, we mean of the four madhabs, Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki, Hanbali, in the Haramain lands, authored refutations against him, were opposed to him within Najd itself. Because people don't realize that Najd at his time also had different scholars. It wasn't Salafi at that time, as will be coming up. To the point that some of the scholars like Sheikh al-Bassam, who was a Saudi scholar, he said they were even Hanafis in Najd during that time or before that time. Okay, so they said mainstream Sunni scholarship was opposed to Wahhabism, and then the point is that now you have something which was a group which was regarded as being outliers over time is now being presented as mainstream. Now is being presented as Islam in inverted commas, whereas it was regarded as something which was erroneous and on the fringes of Islam. So since the parents, mainstream Sunni authorities united in their condemnation of the group, pretty much united. You have the odd scholar here and there who might praise them, but when you dig deeper, even those scholars themselves did not fully support them, or did admit that they went beyond the bounds on some issues related to violence. So, for example, Imam Ibn Abidin, one of the greatest Hanafi scholars of the later Islamic period, our period, he called the Wahhabi movement Khawarij. So the Khawarij were a group who emerged at the time of the companions, and they made takfir of the companions and fought them and engaged in violence. So he said, who engage in takfir and start killing other Muslims are called Khawarij, and he used that name for them. The scholars of Mecca and Medina, so even as late as the early 1900s, there was a work written by an Indian scholar where, from what my understanding is, that the scholars of the Hijaz wrote a set of questions, and one of their questions was, what do you say about Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab? The scholars responded that we say he's from the Khawarij, and his movement is from the Khawarij, and this was signed off by the scholars of Mecca and Medina. In the early 1900s, let's say about 100 years ago, the scholars of the two holy cities, in order to check somebody's authenticity, asking them, what do you say about this figure at this school? Okay? And the Hanbali families of Syria, so they may say we're Hanbali, but they were Hanbali families in Syria who were writing refutations of Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab as well. And to the point that some Wahhabi scholars made takfir of those families as well. As you can see, takfir is going to be a common theme in their writings. Okay, so that's just an overview historically, very, very quickly. It's not very detailed, but just to give you some kind of understanding in a general sense. But the question is, what about unity? Because people may ask, why are you discussing this topic? Maybe we should focus on some other things. Yes, we have lots of different important issues that affect us, but this is one of them as well. Anybody trying to say that it's not an important issue is, I think, denying obvious facts. Obviously, we don't focus on this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and are obsessed with it, but it is an important issue which has gone unchallenged. For the sake of unity, these matters need to be discussed. If you have a group of people who are trying to do something, and then within the group, there's two people who, one of them is always punching the other person, like, you know, siblings, for example, or another relationship that people have. It can be in any, you can think of many different examples where you have a group of people and one is annoying the other person or punching them, kicking them. And then when the person who's being mistreated or is being mislabeled or oppressed turns around and says that, why are you doing this? And then people say, no, let's maintain unity. Let's not talk about it now. Let's deal with it later on. How do you think that person would feel? And I think that's, for me personally, I think that's what the example has been with mainstream traditional Sunni Muslims. who follow the Ashari Maturidi or Orthodox Athari Hanbali creed and the four madhabs. That's our definition. We don't go into any more depth than that about which place in India or Pakistan you're linked with, etc. We're not interested in that. That's the definition of Ahl Sunnati wal Jama'ah. Alhamdulillah, that's always been the classical definition, and we kind of adhere to that. So those people are being mistreated, mislabeled, and every time they try to raise this issue, there'll be people saying, don't discuss this, just ignore it, don't worry about it. And what happens over time is that these misunderstandings just grow and grow and grow to the point where you have basic issues of Tawheed and Shirk, which are just become totally 180 now, where something which is recommended in the four madhabs has now become shirk to a lot of people, because people don't tackle it head on, the issue. And we'll give those examples later on subsequent weeks, those specific examples, something which is recommended in the four madhabs, which many people, anecdotally, that you become regard as shirk. Unity cannot take place when the promotion of minority takfiri misunderstandings. We cannot have a group of the community just persistently promoting minority takfiri understandings and then talk about unity. You cannot have people saying, for example, translating books where you talk about demolishing the green dome of the Prophet ﷺ, and then talk about we're all for community. You can't have people saying we don't know whether Imam Busiri is a Muslim or not. We think he's Muslim because he might have made tawbah before he died. That's their understanding. That's how they present their tawheed. And then at the same time talk about community unity, because that's what happens. And there's examples of that on paper of people who adopt this kind of approach, and they think that's normal. They think that's normal. That is unity. I can talk about this. I can talk about that. This person may not be a Muslim, and there's those positions that I mentioned, and at the same time talk about unity. How's that possible? We don't accept that. I don't think most people would not accept that as an understanding of unity. And practical unity at the level of scholarship is a litmus test. I don't have time to go into this, but in the subsequent lessons or lectures, inshallah, we'll go into the fifth positions where you see something is the Salafi school might label as shirk or haram, and the Sunni school say it's permitted or recommended. And there's a wide spectrum of how those rulings match up. But people say we respect the madhabs, like the Salafi school now. They will say they respect the madhab. You can pray as you want. You can place your hands here or here, do rafal yadayn, move your finger. We're not bothered. We respect the madhabs. But do they respect the madhabs when it comes to issues of tawheed and shirk? What you're going to find is they don't. It's just we respect the madhabs as long as they don't contradict what we say. So it comes in the issue of tawheed, and it also comes in the issue of bid'ah as well, innovation. We don't have a problem with being Hanafi. Okay, so mid-Shaban is okay then. What happens then? Then the answer comes back, well, you need to be careful. And then the spin doctrine happens. That's why I call it spin doctrine, where they forget the madhabs and they start going to what's the evidence and what did the Salaf say. But you just said that you respect madhabs. So then you should be saying to someone, if you're Hanafi, Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanbali, then mid-Shaban, Shabi Barat is fine. You can stay up on that night. It's good to stay up on that night according to your madhab. We'll open our mosque as well for those people who want to come and individually pray. Will they do that? What happened to the respect there? It doesn't exist actually. It's just a slogan. Like one of the scholars said, but it's my state is that I'm a Sufi in terms of speech but not in action. Okay, and then other people say we talk about unity in our speech but not in our action. Anyway, alhamdulillah, that's a greater issue. Not to say that the Sufis don't have issues about tolerance as well, but it's something which you shouldn't be sidetracked by, that we respect madhabs. It doesn't really mean that, to be honest, from my experience. I note the difference between the Salafis and Wahhabis. You now have a few Salafi scholars who are highly critical of Wahhabism, so we have to be fair. There are scholars now in the Salafi school who are anti-Wahhabi. Some people think how's that possible? It is possible. You can be Salafi without being Wahhabi. How many are there? People like that, it's probably a very small number, but there are some scholars now who are emerging. They're saying these books of Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab and their scholars, they're just full of takfir. They have a serious problem. Okay, moving on, shortcomings in responses. This is quite important as well, because from my experience, I found the following. When people respond to the Salafi or Wahhabi school, what did they do? Over-reliance on the hadith of Najd. So one answer fits all response might be that saying the hadith of Najd, the famous hadith that you've heard of, that where the Prophet ﷺ was asked to pray for Najd, and he did not pray for Najd, and said that the horn of the devil will emerge from there. And in the past, was growing up as well, people just sometimes would often mention that just some kind of proof to silence people, but it doesn't really answer anything, really, because that hadith is debated as well, whether it means Najd, whether it means Iraq. Scholars did say when the movement of Shaykh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab emerged that hadith applied to them. A number of scholars did say that, but to use that as some kind of powerful evidence that you're wrong, they are wrong, I think is a problem. Because, for example, somebody sees a group of people just dancing around a grave. And now with YouTube, you see all sorts of really things that I've seen, things which I would never believe. I would say people are exaggerating. But then you see the YouTube video of what happened and you think, that's just crazy what's happening. Okay, but then in response, you just say, oh, well, we don't believe you because there's a hadith in Najd about you people. How does that answer it? It doesn't answer anything. That doubt in the person's mind, the question that they have still hasn't been answered. You just give them a general response, okay? And that's just, so I don't think you would really need to go there, because their books are full of so many evidences against them. You don't need to go to the hadith of Najd. Okay, so but not to say that people did not use it against them, they did use it against them. Okay, use of the fabricated book, Confessions of a British Spy, that's just a fabricated text. Unfortunately, some people think it's authentic. It's published out of Turkey in the past. It's not true. Basically, it's saying that a British spy met Sheikh Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab and then told him to start a movement. And it's all a British conspiracy. And it's just false, it's a lie. Decay and corruption of those who ascribe themselves to Sufism. So that also has an impact as well. You have people being involved in practices which are correct. And that just leads into people just moving towards Salafism, Wahabism. Unfortunately, it just helps them in their process, in their journey, going towards that. And some aspects of their criticism were justified. Some, okay, it's a very nuanced statement there. So the Salafi Wahhabi movement had some justified criticisms, although, as we're going to see, they went way beyond any kind of sane boundaries in their approach.